I still call him Leader Hoyer.
I thank my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Scalise and I have been partners in being very, very strong supporters of Israel and making sure that Israel has the funds it needs to be successful, sovereign, secure, and safe. And we remain in that position. And the reason I asked the gentleman to yield, I don't know what's going to happen to this legislation. I do know that the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee has said this legislation we're considering is dead upon arrival in the Senate. I don't know whether that's the case. But I would ask my friend, I'm no longer the leader, but I will tell my friend, the leader of the Republican Party, that if you would bring a bill to the floor tomorrow that has this $14.3 billion, I would like it to have Ukraine, but if it doesn't have Ukraine in it, I would like it to have humanitarian relief, but if it doesn't have humanitarian relief, I believe it would pass on suspension overwhelmingly with votes from your side and votes from this side. And I would ask the gentleman to consider that alternative. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
And I know the gentleman yielded back, and I appreciate the conversations that the gentleman I had. He's led many delegations to Israel. I think most of us have been to Israel and seen firsthand some of those towns. I've been to Sderot, other cities that have come under attack, and the heartbreak, going to some of the kibbutzes, and have heard just harrowing stories. And so we want to make sure they get their relief. I also know this, and obviously as we talk about funding of government, we just passed an appropriations bill last night. We're going to be moving, after we get through this bill, into two more appropriations bills. We'll be working, late into the night tomorrow on more appropriations bills to properly fund government. When you look at the bills we've already sent over to the Senate that include the defense appropriations bill, that includes more funding for Israel, along with the state and foreign operations bill that also includes more funding for Israel. When we've had heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, military leaders, come before us in committees to testify about the major threats globally, they've been asked point blank, what is the major threat to America? And you would think if you're, a military leader, you'd be talking about maybe China and some of the threats they pose that we know are very real, other countries. That's not what they talked about. They talked about our nation's debt, that the nation's debt is the biggest threat. And so if we can do both, support our friends around the world and start confronting our nation's debt, and we're going to have to do this over and over again. The Speaker talked about a debt commission that got a lot of bipartisan interest. And in fact, bicameral interest. These are all issues we have to confront at the same time. So we're going to continue to do our work. The Senate could pass that bill to the President's desk, and I think in the end he would sign it. If the Senate passes this bill that we're going to pass today to the Senate, I have no doubt the President would sign this bill. We've got to confront our challenges here. We need border security. As we talk about Ukraine, we need to secure America's border because we know there are people on the terrorist watch list coming into our country right now that we cannot ignore. This administration might be ignoring it. Democrat mayors, Republican mayors alike recognize it's a major problem in their cities. That has to be confronted. We're going to confront it, continue to work on those issues as well. But all of this has to be dealt with at the same time. And none of this happens in a vacuum. And many of these problems are interrelated. And so we're going to continue to confront all of them and work as we can, hopefully, together. But obviously, today maybe we might not all be on the same page. Tomorrow, I think on that Iran oil sanctions bill, we'll be closer. But we got to keep working through these issues together.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. Would you yield for just a short comment?
I'll yield one more
Thank
time.
you very much. The gentleman's very generous. The irony, as I pointed out, Mr. Leader, is that in the pay-for that you have used, CBO scores that as a $12.5 billion increase in the debt, not a decrease. And the reason for that is it raises it cuts $28 billion, essentially, that we would otherwise collect, and that we spend 14 of that, so there's a net $12 billion plus remaining to add to the deficit. So I understand the gentleman. I agree with the gentleman. The debt is important. We need to deal with it. I agree with his observation that our defense officials see that as a clear and present danger to our country. We need to deal with it. But I suggest respectfully to the gentleman, his offset does not, or not his offset, but the offset, does not accomplish that objective. And I thank you for yielding.
And thank you. And final point on that, obviously, if you look at the history of CBO, they're the referee, the scorekeeper that has to be used. They've often been wrong. I would say often wrong, but never in doubt. But when they're wrong, they're usually wrong to the detriment of taxpayers. And here's a classic example. Only in Washington, where eliminating government positions, they count as something that's going to cost the deficit. Getting rid of the size of government is ruled by CBO as increasing the deficit. But they exposed a dirty little secret about those new IRS agents, and I emphasize new. These are not existing employees. This is tens of thousands of new IRS agents that President Biden wants to hire. It exposed that the only way that they generate money is by raising taxes on families, including those making under $400,000. And in their report, they point this out. If you're an American citizen who believed Joe Biden's promise that you will not pay a dime in new taxes if you make less than $400,000, and he said it over and over again, it's on video, that promise is broken, according to the CBO in this report, to the tune of over $4 billion in new pet taxes that those families will be paying. Not existing taxes, new taxes those families will be paying. So if you want to save $4 billion in taxes, and you're one of those families that bought the promise, and frankly, in times of high inflation, high interest rates, high costs for everything from gas to groceries, no family should be paying more in new taxes. I would argue this bill will save those families a lot more money than what those new IRS agents were going to collect in new taxes, and we're doing them all a favor while also helping address a serious spending problem in Washington and standing with our ally, Israel, most importantly. That's why we need to pass the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields.